Karen Mitchell is breaking into my root cellar right now at 2:47 in the morning. I'm standing in my dark kitchen in my bare feet, watching the chairwoman of our county water rights board cut my padlock. Like she's done it 100 times before, my thumb hovering over the 911 button while she sneaks into the one place on my land she has absolutely no legal right to be. And the crazy part is, this is the same woman who has spent 6 months trying to destroy me with fake violations and impossible fines. But she has no idea that tonight I'm done playing defense. And when she steps all the way inside that cellar, I'm going to lock the door from my phone and let the cops see exactly what she's been willing to do in the dark to protect her little empire. I guess I should back up a little, or this is going to sound like I just woke up one day and decided to trap a public official underground. My name is Mike Davidson. I run a ranch out in Red Rock County, Montana, the kind of place where sunrise hits the pastures like a painting, and the only thing louder than the wind is the cattle. At feeding time, my grandfather bought this land back when you could still do that without hiring a lawyer, and he built a stone root cellar into the side of a hill behind the house in 1948. With his own hands, using rocks he pulled from the creek bed and a simple irrigation line that feeds cool water past the stone to keep food cold. That cellar has been there longer than the paved road, longer than the water rights board, longer than half the houses in this county. It's just always been part of the ranch, like the barn or the windmill, something you don't question, you just take care of. A Tuesday morning not too long ago, I was standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the sun turn the east pasture gold, the way it always does, when I opened a crisp official envelope with the Red Rock County Water Rights Board seal on it. And that was the first time I saw the phrase, water usage violation, with my name under it. According to this notice, my unauthorized irrigation modification on root cellar cooling system was in violation of some regulation I'd never heard of, and I had 10 days to fix it, or face fines and enforcement measures. And I remember laughing at first because my grandfather's cooling pipe predates the board itself by about 20 years. So the idea that it suddenly needed permission was almost funny. Almost. The laughter didn't last long. About an hour later, 3 trucks rolled up my gravel drive with government plates flashing in the morning light. The lead truck was a pristine white pickup with Water Rights Board decals on the doors, and I recognized it because I'd seen it driving around other ranches like a storm cloud. Out stepped Karen Mitchell, chairwoman of the board. For the last 6 years, perfectly pressed shirt hair, done like she was headed to a TV interview, not a ranch, and behind her were 2 inspectors, carrying clipboards and cameras like weapons. She walked onto my property with that posture some people get when they've been given a little authority and start thinking it's a crown, looking around like she was already deciding what did and didn't belong. "Mr. Davidson," she called out, all fake warmth. "We're here for the mandatory water usage inspection. I trust you received our notice." And she nodded at the paper in my hand, like it was a key that unlocked every door on my land. I stepped out onto the porch, kept my voice level, because years of dealing with stubborn livestock taught me that calm is more powerful than shouting. And I said, "I got your notice, Karen. I also notice it doesn't include a court order or a search warrant. So you're not going down to that root cellar today. You're going to get back in those trucks and drive off my property." I had spent just enough late nights reading statutes to know that her authority stopped at my fence line when it came to structures like that. But she wasn't used to hearing no. You could see it in the way her smile tightened, and her eyes went cold for a second. "Mr. Davidson, I think you misunderstand," she said, and the warmth in her voice vanished. The board has full authority to inspect any irrigation system in Red Rock County, including unauthorized modifications on your property. Refusing to cooperate is not in your best interest. And that last part came out with this little edge, like a threat wearing a suit. I didn't raise my voice, I just said, "Show me the law chapter and verse where it says, you can walk into a 70-year-old root cellar on private land without a judge signing off until then." This conversation is over. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might push it. Then she backed off. But as they drove away, one of the inspectors leaned out and took pictures of my gate, the irrigation lines. The hill slow and careful, and my gut told me this wasn't inspection anymore. It was reconnaissance. The next few weeks felt like psychological warfare disguised as paperwork. Violation notices started arriving daily with almost military precision. One for my irrigation timer, being off by 30 minutes one. For a livestock water trough, allegedly oversized one, accusing my root cellar. Cooling system of operating outside permitted hours. Every piece of paper carrying another $500 fine, and some lecture about community responsibility. And yeah, when you're already working long days just to keep the place running. Opening that mailbox starts to feel like taking a punch before breakfast. Anonymous phone calls kicked in. 2 voices claiming to be from state water inspectors, demanding immediate access to my property. Hanging up the second I asked for credentials. And when I called the actual state office, they had no idea what I was talking about. At the monthly Water Rights Board meeting, Karen stood up front like a prosecutor and announced the ongoing water abuse issue at the Davidson Ranch in this solemn voice that made it sound like I was dumping poison in the river, not cooling potatoes in an old stone cellar. And I sat in the back of that room, surrounded by neighbors, who suddenly found their boots incredibly interesting when her eyes swept over them, too scared of getting singled out to even nod in my direction. That's how fear works in small communities. You don't need to hit everyone. You just make an example out of one person and let the story do the rest. Within days, the people who used to borrow tools and share coffee on my porch stopped answering my calls. Invitations dried up. I was alone long before I was officially isolated, and the quiet around here started feeling sharp. That would have been bad enough, but Karen wasn't the kind of person to stop at humiliation. Trucks started appearing on the roads bordering my land, at odd hours, parked just long enough for someone to lean out and photograph my irrigation setup. My water meter readings began changing between morning and night, not going up from use, but sometimes dropping as if someone had come out and manually tampered with the numbers. And precision cuts in my lines showed up in places so specific it took hours crawling through mud and brush to find them. My phone rang at 2 a.m., at 4:30 a.m., always with whispers about water thieves before the caller hung up, and my motion sensors pinged at 3 a.m., often enough that I started sleeping in my boots. You know what I mean? There is a particular kind of tired that comes from knowing somebody is messing with your life on purpose, and you don't even know when they'll strike next. So I adapted. I installed better cameras, pointed them at every corner that felt vulnerable, especially around the root cellar. I logged every violation, every strange vehicle, every anonymous call, with times, dates, and details, and I dug deeper into water law than I ever wanted to, because if they were going to use the system against me, I wanted to understand the system better than they did. And then came the day that changed everything. The day I realized I wasn't just dealing with a petty bureaucrat, but something that looked a lot like organized crime wearing a county badge. I was in town loading feed when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the main gate camera. I thumbed open the feed and saw a figure in a state water compliance inspector uniform striding up to my locked gate, lifting bolt cutters, like it was just another tool of the trade, and slicing through the lock I'd paid good money for in about 3 seconds flat. The truck he'd arrived in had government plates, and a paint job so clean it looked like a dealership ad. But something about the condition of it, the way the decals sat, didn't quite match the beat-up state vehicles I'd seen 100 times before. On my little screen, I watched him drive down to my house park and start unloading gear. Scanners, cameras, equipment that made no sense for a simple water usage check. And then he headed straight, and I mean straight for my root cellar. No knocking, no paperwork under the door, no call, just a fake authority costume and bolt cutters. And the sickest part was knowing I was 30 minutes away while someone walked across my land like it was his. I called the Red Rock County Sheriff's Office, told the dispatcher I was watching someone break into my property in what sure looked like a stolen uniform. And then I drove home fast enough that my coffee sloshed out of the cup holder. By the time I got there, the intruder was gone. My lock was in pieces on the ground, and near the stone foundation of the root cellar was a small, expensive-looking electronic sensor half buried in the dirt, still blinking. Deputy Ryan Williams showed up, ran the plates from my footage, through his system, and looked at me with that face that says things just got serious. The truck had been reported stolen from a government motor pool in Helena 3 days earlier. He knelt by that sensor, turned it over a few times, and said, "Mike, this isn't some annoyed inspector or Karen on a power trip. This is professional surveillance, and whoever did this was searching for something very specific under your land." A few days later, after he pulled together what he needed, Williams sat across from Karen in her office and laid out the evidence: my video, the stolen truck, the equipment left behind. And while she didn't admit anything, she also didn't act surprised, which in its own way said a lot. The sheriff got a restraining order against her stepping foot on my property. 0 contact, 1,000 feet minimum distance from my boundaries. Clear enough that even someone as creative as she was couldn't twist the wording. For maybe 4 days, it felt like somebody had finally hit pause. The trucks were gone. The phone was quiet. My mailbox held only normal bills and catalogs, and the motion sensors only picked up deer and wind. Then the sabotage changed shape. Instead of people on my fence line, my infrastructure started failing in very precise, very expensive ways. A main water line to my cattle tanks was severed underground near the root cellar in a way that starved the herd on the hottest day of the year. Sections of fence were cut just enough to let 23 head of cattle out onto the highway. My irrigation pump line was sliced during peak watering hours, causing an $8,000 repair job, and my hay barn burned in a fire that at first glance looked accidental until investigators found signs of accelerant poured in a way that maximized damage while maintaining plausible deniability. At the same time, my water allocation was mysteriously slashed by 80%. Under emergency conservation measures, my property taxes were flagged for irregularities that triggered a reassessment threatening to triple what I owed, and my federal grazing permits were suddenly revoked based on environmental concerns nobody could show me documentation for. On paper, every one of those moves looked legitimate, all proper forms, filed, all signatures in the right places but put together. It was like watching someone dismantle my life with a checklist, trying to force me into the same corner they'd pushed other ranchers into. I'm not going to lie. There were nights standing in the ruins of that hay barn when I seriously considered just selling out and leaving, telling myself it was only land, that it wasn't worth the constant war. But every time I thought about giving up, I pictured Karen's face at that board meeting the way she enjoyed making me the example, and something stubborn in me dug in deeper. The twist came because of one more accident. Another water line near the root cellar went bad. I was out there with a shovel and a bad attitude, cursing whoever kept slicing my pipes, when the blade hit something hard and hollow 3 feet down. Not rock, not pipe, a different sound. I scraped back the dirt and uncovered a big PVC pipe sealed and wrapped in plastic like somebody had really wanted whatever was inside to stay dry for a long time, and it was buried in the exact spot that fake inspector had spent most of his time scanning during the break-in. My heart started pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the digging. I hauled it up to the house, set my phone to record, popped the caps off, and inside was a waterproof box holding $73,000 in cash and a stack of documents that made my blood run cold in a different way. There were meeting minutes, financial records, email printouts, spreadsheets, all detailing a water rights fraud scheme that had been running for years with Karen Mitchell's name all over it. The pattern was disgusting and sadly brilliant. Create standards nobody could realistically meet. Hammer small ranchers with violations and fines until they were drowning. Then have shell companies waiting to buy their land for pennies and transfer the water rights to people who played ball. At the bottom was a USB drive labeled Karen's insurance policy and a handwritten note from Tom Bradley, the man who had owned my ranch before me, and apparently the former treasurer of the Water Rights Board, explaining that he had uncovered the scheme, started collecting evidence, and then watched Karen and her allies systematically destroy his life until he ran for his safety. He'd buried the proof by the root cellar because he believed someone in the future might need it, because he didn't want the story to die when he was forced out of the county. Sitting at my table, surrounded by his meticulous notes, bank trails, and recorded conversations, where board members casually discussed problem ranchers and priority acquisition targets like they were moving chess pieces, I finally understood why my property, and especially that cellar, mattered so much to Karen. She wasn't trying to protect Red Rock's water. She was trying to find the evidence that could send her to prison. When I showed Deputy Williams a portion of what I had, he went quiet. In that way, law enforcement does, when the case in front of them just morphed into something bigger than local drama. "Mike," he said, tapping a page that showed money flowing through shell companies, "if we can prove this, and catch them in the act of trying to destroy it, this isn't a slap on the wrist. This is federal." So we made a decision, one I know not everyone will agree with. I scanned every document, backed it up off-site, made sure that even if my house burned down again, the story wouldn't. Then I resealed that pipe with copies and buried it right back where I'd found it like bait. I upgraded the cameras around the cellar, tucked one inside, and installed a heavy door with a smart lock I could control from my phone. A lock that from the outside just looked like any other latch. Then I started talking, but not to Karen directly. I let it slip around town that I'd dug something interesting up while fixing pipes, joked at the feed store that I might have to take a little package to a lawyer in Helena, and I posted one vague photo online of dirt on my hands, with a caption about finding what some folks really don't want you to see, because in a small county, you don't need to tell the queen bee anything, the hive will do it for you. I also made it known I'd be out of town for a few days. Told folks at the diner I had to haul supplies and would be staying over, even made a real hotel reservation in case anyone checked. On the day of my supposed trip, I loaded my truck, where plenty of eyes could see, waved to a neighbor, drove out of sight, then looped back through back roads to a high ridge where I could see my ranch and watch the live camera feeds on my phone. Hours passed. My phone buzzed only with normal motion. A stray dog, a breeze catching a branch. And then, mid-afternoon, I got the alert I'd been waiting for. Motion detected at main entrance. I raised the binoculars and watched Karen's pristine white board pickup roll down my drive. Another vehicle behind it, and saw her climb out with the same brisk confidence she'd shown that first day. Only this time, she wasn't carrying a clipboard. She was hauling bolt cutters and a heavy bag alongside board treasurer James Morrison. They didn't knock, didn't even glance at the house. They went straight to the hill, straight to the cellar, talking in low, urgent voices our cameras still picked up. "We find it, we burn it. We're done," James muttered, and Karen answered. "If that file gets to a federal investigator, we're not done. We're finished now. Move." While they worked on the door, I hit record on every angle I had and called 911, told the dispatcher exactly who was trespassing under a restraining order and what they were carrying. Through the cellar cam, I watched Karen descend into the cool dark with a flashlight, and a shovel watched her dig in the spot where I had recently rebury. The pipe watched her face light up with this ugly satisfaction when she pulled it free. She pried it open, saw the files, and started flipping through them with shaking hands, already reaching for the portable shredder James was lowering down. That's when I pressed the button on my phone, and the smart lock on the cellar door slid into place with a soft click, sealing her inside. At first, she didn't notice, too focused on the documents, but as sirens grew louder out on the road, she rushed up the steps, tried the handle, and realized it wasn't budging. "James, the door's stuck open it," she shouted, pounding on the wood, and up above, he froze like a deer in headlights. When I pulled into my own driveway a few minutes later, in my dusty truck, 3 sheriff's vehicles were already there, boxing in the board pickup. Officers had James on his knees beside a spilled bag of shredders, lighter fluid and gloves, and one of them looked at me like, "You ready to open your little trap now?" Deputy Williams walked with me to the hill, asked, "She in there?" And I just nodded and showed him the live video on my phone of Karen in the cellar, clutching a stack of incriminating paperwork, still banging on the inside of the door, yelling that this is illegal. He had me unlock. The smart lock swung the door open, and there she was, the woman who'd spent months telling everyone I was abusing water and breaking rules, standing in my root cellar with folders of evidence in her hands and a lighter in her pocket, while 4 different cameras recorded. She tried to turn it on me immediately, of course shouting that I had kidnapped her, that I was tampering with official records, that she was only there to secure documents. But Williams didn't even blink. He just read her rights, cuffed her, and walked her out into the daylight, watching her get loaded into the back of that patrol car, while the evidence she'd been willing to commit crimes to erase lay scattered at my feet. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not revenge exactly, more like relief with a backbone. The weeks and months that followed were a blur of investigators, federal agents, forensic accountants, and lawyers, because once those files landed on the right desks, the case stopped being angry, rancher versus local board, and turned into organized racketeering using government authority. And Karen's world started collapsing piece by piece. Tom Bradley, the man who had buried that pipe and then run for his life, came back under federal protection, told his story, filled in the gaps. And by the time the dust settled, there were dozens of indictments, several board members and officials in handcuffs, millions in stolen value, traced and seized. and Karen sentenced to a long stay in a place with bars that don't require smart locks. 18 months after they hauled her off my land, I stood once again in the shadow of my grandfather's root cellar, listening to the quiet that had finally returned to Red Rock County, the only motion on my cameras coming from deer and wind, the only letters in my mailbox being the boring kind you almost miss when they're gone. And I realized that what we'd fought for wasn't just my cooling pipe or one patch of dirt. It was the idea that people in charge don't get to weaponize the rules to steal from everyone else. Not going to pretend it didn't cost me money, sleep years off my life, you name it. But standing there on solid rock that had held up my family for generations, I knew I'd make the same choice again. So now I'm going to throw this back to you, because I know some folks will hear this and say, I went too far, locking that woman in my root cellar, even for a minute. And others will say, I didn't go far enough. That people like that never really pay for what they do. What do you think? If you were in my boots watching someone abuse their office to destroy your livelihood, and then literally break into your property to burn the truth, would you fight back the way I did, or keep your head down and hope they pick someone else next time? Drop a comment. Tell me if you think I crossed a line, or just finally drew one, and if you've lived through your own version of this, an HOA gone mad, a crooked official, a boss who thought they were untouchable. Share it below, because you never know who might need to hear. They're not crazy for wanting to push back. If this story hit a nerve, or made you think twice about what authority really looks like, hit like, subscribe for more real people dealing with real bad decisions, and keep your receipts, your camera rolling, and your spine straight. Because sometimes the only way justice finds its way home is when ordinary folks like you and me refuse to back down.